The disappearance 2 years ago of Donald Bruce Mackay fanned waspish feeling against Italians in Griffith. After all, a few of them had recent convictions for growing marijuana, and Don Mackay was renowned for his hostility to the drug. His presumed murder and the public outcry that followed hastened the Royal Commission. Anxious politicians were determined to produce the culprits. Perhaps the nearest they've come so far is this headline. Certainly no one has been charged, but the finger is still pointed.
Good evening. I have asked for this radio and television time tonight for the purpose of announcing that we today have concluded an agreement to end the war and bring peace with honor in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. The following statement is being issued at this moment in Washington and Hanoi. At 12:30 Paris time today, January 23, 1973, the agreement on ending the war and restoring peace in Vietnam was initialed by Dr. Henry Kissinger on behalf of the United States and Special Advisor Lee Duc-Tho on behalf of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. The agreement will be formally signed by the parties participating in the Paris Conference on Vietnam on January 27, 1973 at the International Conference Center in Paris. The ceasefire will take effect at 2400 Greenwich Mean Time, January 27, 1973. The United States and the Democratic Republic of Vietnam express the hope that this agreement will ensure stable peace in Vietnam and contribute to the preservation of lasting peace in Indochina and Southeast Asia. That concludes the formal statement.
From the beginning, the pilots, particularly those who were involved in the covert operations side of the flying, were aware that they were at least working for the Central Intelligence Agency. There was no attempt ever to disguise this. The secret was the ownership of the company, and there was only a handful, a dozen people perhaps, out of several hundred that would know that the company was in fact owned by the Central Intelligence Agency.
The largest operation undertaken by Air America was the secret war in Laos, which was largely a byproduct of the war in neighboring Vietnam. Of particular interest to American strategists was North Vietnam's principal supply route into South Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, an ever-changing network of roads and mountain trails which crossed many times into Laos.
Meantime, Patrick O'Brien was bagging big-time criminals. He gathered enough evidence to have Mr. Asia himself, Marty Johnston, arrested for selling him heroin.
No one sort of said, oh wow, we've caught Mr. Asia, let's fucking lock them away. It was just, we just caught some guy selling me heroin.
Before they could be placed on trial, Johnston and his associates skipped the country.
While on bail, everyone that had been charged left the country. And so there was never ever a court case. These people were never ever convicted of those offences.
It was hugely frustrating for police, especially for the agents who'd been set up as flies in the web. Patrick had played a key role in almost bringing members of New Zealand's most feared drug ring to justice. Thousands of lives had been wrecked in Mr. Asia's slipstream, and many more shattered as the key players continued their operation from overseas.
Australia has its own homegrown version of the mafia. Its roots are from Italy's poor south, the region of Calabria.
Oh, shut up, you...
In Australia, its power grew after World War II when thousands of Italian migrants, some with mafia connections, made their way to Australia.
The Calabrians have been involved in criminal activity spanning cannabis production, heroin, cocaine, ecstasy, hashish importation, insurance frauds, other types of frauds, through to money laundering, to passport offences.
With all organised crime, there is a hierarchy, a leader. With the mafia, it's a godfather.
There are people who would be identified as godfathers, but they don't, in fact, rule the organisation as they do in Italy. They are more of a father figure from whom people seek counsel and or get advice.
Back in the 60s, the Australian mafia had its roots here at Melbourne's Queen Victoria markets. Sellers paid the mafia a cut to have their produce sold, and wholesalers paid a levy to buy the produce at a particular price.
In money terms, they were among the most lucrative returns in those days, compared with, say, backstreet gambling in Victoria or small-time brothels. It was very lucrative, and it made the then mafia very powerful in Victorian terms.
At that point, there was a division in the police force. There were those cops like Ferguson, Don Ferguson, who believed in what was called the clean quid. There were some cops believed that there was such a thing as a clean quid, that is to say the money you got from extorting bribes from working girls and illegal gamblers and people who were doing abortions. That was regarded as the clean quid. Whereas the money you got from extorting from people who were running drugs, that was the dirty quid. And Ferguson didn't agree with it. And Kelly and Cray, and particularly Cray, wanted to get into the dirty quid, into the drugs quid, and Ferguson was an obstacle to it. He wouldn't stand for it. So, you know, they have weird sets of ethics, these guys. And so I think the strongest view is that Cray murdered Ferguson in police headquarters, where Bert sensibly didn't go, 7 months after Bert was there. He murdered him in the lavatory in police headquarters. And Cray was a guy who had the runs on the board. It's also believed that he went up to Brisbane and murdered Shirley Briffman because she was talking about the corruption in Sydney. And it's also believed that he murdered Don Mackay, the guy who was talking about the drugs or the marijuana plantations out at Griffith. And the best view on those marijuana plantations were that they were so huge, the one at Colliamberley was so huge, that it could not have been used to supply the people who used marijuana in Australia. It had to be for overseas consumption. So it was a big export thing and a huge thing. And they got someone to kill Mackay, and a fellow called Jim Baisley went to jail for it. But the best view, I think, is that it was Cray who did it.
The 50s and 60s in the Cross. Times change, crimes change, but not all that much. The very public street warfare of the past has gone underground. The old razor gangs ousted by a smarter, more modern style of criminal. Some of the most notorious and dangerous names in Sydney's criminal history began to emerge. Abe Saffron, known as Mr. Sin, George Freeman, a colourful racing identity, and Mr. Big himself, Lennie McPherson. Abe Saffron muscled his way into the booming nightclub business, in the process taking over Tilly Devine's and Kate Lee's old vice and grog trade. Lennie McPherson, George Freeman and another hard case, Stan the Man Smith, all emerged in the 60s. They weren't interested in taking over from Saffron, but quickly realised there was money to be made working for him.
What we're asking for is protection money, and we're asking for reduced violence so we can increase our profits.
It was the three, McPherson, Freeman and Stan Smith, who ran organised crime.
Fueling this rise of organised crime, corrupt cops, backhand payments to the police, kept the crooks in control of the Cross and kept the crooks out of prison.
Freeman and McPherson also had a number of politicians on side over the time.
By the time the 70s rolled around, the four men really had a hold on King's Cross, and then came R&R. Tens of thousands of US servicemen on leave from the war in Vietnam. The demand for drugs skyrocketed.
They came here looking for more drugs and heaps of sex and lots of booze. And King's Cross was the place, and Saffron was the man who turned all of that on.
When we went into plain clothes back in those days, you'd start off at a police station and you'd do what was called the A-list, and you'd work with the local detectives for about 6 months, and they would assess you as to your ability or not. And then you would go on a list. You'd go before what was called the bull ring, and you'd have to go into the CIB, and I remember my trip in there, and I can remember meeting Detective Inspector Ray Kelly for the first time. He was a famous detective which we'd all read about and knew about. He, of course, he was known as Gunner Kelly. He had been involved in quite a few shootings and, of course, had shot a man dead in the line of duty, and that name stuck with him right through the rest of his life. But I looked up to blokes like him because they were the blokes who kept the place nice and clean and tidy.
In the early 70s, in the inner city suburbs of Sydney, there were repeated clashes between real estate developers, residents and police.
You're going to endanger your own life, you're going to endanger the life of policemen.
In the Glebe, in Woolloomooloo, in the Rocks and in Victoria Street, King's Cross. The Victoria Street battle was the fiercest of all.
I want to see them here with me.
Bring the kids, for Christ's sake.
The confrontation occurred after this man, Frank Tiemann, a businessman who'd come to Australia penniless after the war, bought up a huge slice of the street in the late 60s and early 70s. Tiemann wanted to knock down the old terrace houses and replace them with high-rise tower blocks containing shops, offices and apartments.
The final plan involves a great improvement for the street. Most of the old buildings, as designated by the National Trust fronting Victoria Street, will be restored. Then there'll be a public green area between the back of the old and the back of the new development, and there'll be a new development facing the city.
But the building unions refused to pull down the houses and put up the tower blocks. For 2 years, from 1973 to 1975, the green bans remained in force. At the same time, squatters, demonstrators and groups of Victoria Street residents Many of them low-income earners refused to leave the homes. The police dragged them out. As the battle continued, Frank Tiemann hired this man, a former karate champion Joe Meisner, to help protect his properties. In turn, Meisner hired nearly 100 other men to help him.
Mr. Meisner has a public relations company and a consultant company, and we asked him to look after the property, seeing that some of the houses are empty now, and that he is a karate expert is purely coincidental.
But according to the unions, many of the men employed by Meisner were from strip clubs and bars around King's Cross.
Mr. Tiemann has moved in gangsters under the protection of the police in order to smash down doors and walls in order to get people out. I state now that categorically I think that Mr. Tiemann has made the gravest mistake in his career in the building industry. There will be no further development on this site as long as Mr. Tiemann is in control of the Victoria Street properties.
Many residents agreed, claiming they were being intimidated. Events had turned sour in Victoria Street.
The other day, one of the tenants was visited, just coincidentally, by a man with a crowbar over his shoulder who tried to pin him down to a date to leave.
Well, this is the sort of tactics they've been up to, breaking in the doors. My door was broken in this weekend after the services were cut off.
And then I've had men coming there at night upsetting me. I can't stand it.
So you will be going, it's just a matter of when you get
I'll
your
go
settlement.
when they give me the money.
Have you been offered money to go?
Yes, I have been offered money.
How much did they offer you?
$60.
And that wasn't enough, or you just determined to stay?
By this stage, I am determined to stay, yes.
Almost a year ago to the day, an attractive woman at 37 left this semi in the heart of King's Cross for the last time, and perhaps closed the door on her life. She had walked the streets of the Cross for almost 4 years, and was only too familiar with the development taking place down the road in Victoria Street. This was her greatest obsession. She wanted the project stopped. But that morning, on July the 4th, she ignored the work and went straight to the Carousel restaurant for a business appointment. Then, just before lunch, she left and returned to Darlinghurst Street and climbed into a yellow Falcon. At exactly 11:20, Juanita Nielsen was seen publicly for the last time. What followed is still a mystery, unexplained by months of police investigation.
It's a terrible thing, really, not to know, not to know exactly what has happened.
It was almost 6 years ago when Lyle Dudley met Juanita for the first time. She walked into his small real estate office wanting to buy the nice semi across the road. It wasn't much of a sale, but at the same time he was negotiating one of the biggest deals of his life. $4.5 million worth of property down the road, the very subject of numerous union bans and a continuing conversation brawl. But with the deal almost finalised, he gave little thought to the prospective buyer who was to become so vocal about the other development.
The only thing that I remember was that the woman that lives next door went out to close her door one night, and Juanita said, she said to Juanita, "You don't like the rats either." She was shutting her door. And Juanita said, "I'm not frightened of rats." She said, "I've had a threat on my life." And the police were told this.
Was that a common occurrence for Juanita, as you recall?
No, I wouldn't know. I only heard it verbatim from the woman next door, that lived next door.
Well, living directly opposite, or with your business directly opposite, you'd see her fairly frequently. What was your reaction then when you discovered
Well, she was always very well dressed, exceptionally well dressed, and very, very quiet. She never interfered with anybody as far as I was concerned.
3 spent cartridges and ricochet bullet holes in a nearby wall. McKay had alleged a local mafia-style syndicate was involved in growing and selling millions of dollars worth of marijuana. Evidence he'd collected just before he disappeared led to the discovery of an $81 million marijuana crop near Colliamberley. According to McKay, millions of dollars were coming from illegal plantations on various properties organised by a syndicate with a code of honour and a code of silence. On the orders of the New South Wales Premier, Mr Justice Woodward, a Supreme Court judge, set up a Royal Commission in August 1977, assisted by a QC, now himself a judge, Mr Bill Fisher. The Royal Commission held a marathon series of 187 sittings in Sydney, Griffith, Wollongong and Byron Bay. In all, over 500 witnesses were paraded before it. Their utterances ran into almost 3,000 pages of closely typed transcript. Mr Justice Woodward secretly toured Griffith's grass castles, the colourful term used by the locals to describe palatial houses rumoured to have been built from the proceeds of marijuana. Mr Justice Woodward and his party also visited a winery owned by Mr Antonio Sergi, a man who was alleged to be a principal in an organisation involved in growing, distributing and selling marijuana on a massive scale.
Hello, my name is Matthew Nugan, Managing Director of Nugan Estate Wines. Nugan Estate is a family business, so it is my life, and I'm happy to share the story of its heritage with you. We are a third-generation company which was founded in 1940 by my grandfather, Alfredo Nugan. He and his wife, Annalisa, immigrated from Spain to escape the Spanish Civil War. They landed in Melbourne and ultimately ended up settling in Griffith, outback New South Wales. They started a small fruit and vegetable packaging business, selling whatever was available seasonally via advertisement in the local newspaper. A mail order business, which in the 1940s was like the internet business we are all familiar with today. This is where the family business started building on the traditions we hold true today. 80 years on, we uphold these traditions, like honesty, hard work and good food and wine. My grandfather planted our first grapevines in Nerrican, a small village close to Griffith. Today, his spirit and heritage is honoured by the naming of a road in his honour. He was a great innovator and came up with great ideas, like the first form of refrigerated transport. He would ice rail trucks to send long distances into warm climates while maintaining quality, unheard of at the time. He imported the first mechanical carrot harvester into Australia from the USA. He was also a pioneer in export of premium quality produce all over the world. In 1965, my father, Ken Nugan, took over the family business. After he restructured the company to cope with the ever-evolving logistical and market demands, it underwent substantial growth. He was the first to embrace modern technology to set him apart from his competitors. He was the first in Australia to install a computer-controlled optical sorting system to grade citrus. He also built a state-of-the-art juice factory to utilise waste oranges, producing citrus, apple and pear juice. He also produced citrus oils, a highly sought-after commodity at the time. In 1986, my father died unexpectedly from cancer. This thrust my mother, Michelle, into the male-dominated world of business. This, coupled with the recession, made for challenging times. Mum, with
In his early 30s, Nettie Smith was an established standover man, armed robber, and heroin dealer. He'd already served 2 lengthy jail terms, and he was arrested again in 1976 after a violent hold-up. It was Smith's 32nd birthday, and he was in luck. His arresting officer was Detective Roger Rogerson.
The first day I met Ned was at Rockdale Police Station. Ned was a suspect for an attempted armed robbery on Fielder's Bakery.
That late November day would prove to be the start of a long relationship between the criminal and the detective.
I could see potential in Ned as an informer. He wanted to be friendly. He wanted to he wanted to get close, and this is how police officers, especially detectives in my day, were successful.
But Rogerson and Smith were more than just detective and informant.
Went out many a times for dinners and lunches. I'd met his kids. He'd come to our home. I can tell you there was times where I dropped, and I know it was money. Ned just used to wrap it up and used to say, can you take this over and meet Roger at so-and-so, or this one at so-and-so? And I did, and I'd give it to him. I know it was going on. It was going on. I mean, why else would you pay police?
Nettie Smith was working hand in glove with some corrupt police, paying them off and being protected. He swiftly established himself as a heroin king. By 1978, he was the biggest heroin dealer in Australia and part of a brazen multi-million-dollar drug syndicate operating between Bangkok and Sydney.
These blokes would walk straight back in through customs with a suitcase full of heroin, and no one had any idea. They were completely under the radar back in those days. Well, before you knew it, Ned had 2 or 3 suitcases full of heroin, which he'd sold. Well, suddenly he's rolling in money.
Every 6 weeks, it's believed Nettie Smith received about 15 kilos of imported heroin, which he'd deal for well over $1 million. He never used the drug himself, but Smith was addicted to the money heroin made him.
This is the position where we arranged to meet. They mentioned Dangar Place, Nettie mentioned Dangar Place, which is of course round the corner from here. But a street director, he said, well, it's Beaumont Street, but he also mentioned opposite the Britannia Hotel. Of course, that is the Britannia Hotel. Nettie pulled up in an old BMW. They drove up this way. He pulled up over there. They both got out of the car. Ned gave him a light pat down, and then Warren Lanfranchi walked directly towards me. And then when he got to about here, he kept walking into the lane, into Beaumont Street, heading towards Dangar Place. And as he did so, I then followed him. So, of course, at this point, he's about 2 metres ahead of me. He's turned right here into Dangar Place to walk up there. And, of course, I'm following him. I knew that Detective Sergeant Fraser was lying on the back floor of a car parked where that little blue car is. And I could see a car coming down the hill, which I knew contained Detective Sergeant Harding and Detective Rod Moore. But I've kept walking with him. He was very, very towy. I had heard Detective Sergeant Fraser get out of the car. He was armed with a shotgun. Of course, so did Warren Lanfranchi. We both realised that there was a car coming towards us that I knew contained Detective Sergeant Harding and Detective Moore. Well, because at that point of time, he was very, very towy, absolutely jumping. So with that, he said words to the effect that it was an ambush, and I basically agreed with him. And because at that point of time, he then suddenly just backed around and pulled this gun out from these very tight trousers. And as he was bringing it up, I realised this bloke's going to shoot me. So I reached behind for my gun, and of course I didn't mess around, and I brought it up and I fired one shot, and then fairly quickly after that I fired a second shot, and of course it killed him, and he fell over in the gutter and dead.
Brian was a crooked solicitor who was about to appear at the Stuart Royal Commission and give up all the crooked cops he'd ever worked with. I have to say, I never really liked him much myself. Every time I seen him, he had his hand out.
I'm missing her already. Yeah, I'm going to splurry all over you. What's going on?
Well, I thought I'd come down, join you blokes for a few beers, a few laughs, you know, a bit of rock and roll out here.
Is this your fishing spot, Ned?
Ah, it's one of my fishing spots, mate.
Where's the rods? Where's the bait?
The bait, Mal forgot the bait. Memory like a sieve, mate. Jesus Christ.
I did the wrong thing by you, Ned. I should have given that money back, but my hands were tied.
Water under the bridge, mate.
No, I shouldn't have kept that 50 grand and done nothing. No, I didn't do nothing. I mean, I couldn't get any action going. And the shit hit the fan, and I was warned off, and the cops had it in for you. They had it in for us.
Ah, forget that.
No, please, Ned.
Nah, forget that.
Please, mate. How can I settle up?
Well, I think of something.
You always was a fair man, Ned.
Mate, pass me that coat, ain't
No, Ned, don't do this to me, Ned. Don't do this to me, Ned. No, come on, Ned. Come on, please. I'll just give you anything you want, Ned. Come on, Ned. You tell him now. Come on, you fucking tell him, you bastard. Don't do it to me, Ned. Come on, Ned.
Right. Mate, you talk too much. It's always been in trouble.
You're a dog. You're talking to the Royal Commission. No, that's bullshit. I didn't mention you. I didn't mention any of you. Bastard! No, I didn't mention any of you. No, you don't. No, I didn't tell you anything. Come on, Ned. Don't hurt me, Ned. No, Ned. Ned. Oh, please. No. No, I'll tell him I can't remember anything. Yeah, Oh, Christ, what's that?
Early cooker, mate. Don't make them like they used to, mate.
Hey, let me talk.
You gave us up, huh?
Don't let him do it, mate. Shut it up. Shut it up, mate. Oh, come on, Ned. Don't hurt me. I've got money, Ned. Don't do it to me. No, I don't want to go. No, you bastard. Don't do it. Don't do it, Ned. Ned, please, don't do it. Don't. Oh, no. Don't. Oh, for fuck's sake, shoot me, you bastard. Not this way. Please, don't do it. Oh, please. Oh, no.
See you later.
Oh, fuck.
The Green Line. Wasn't all beer and Skittles.
In recent years, there have been charges from time to time that the CIA has involved itself in illegal activities. Some of the most bizarre to date involve a bank in Australia known as Nugan Hand. And tonight, Gary Shepherd has a report.
When the Nugan Hand Bank of Sydney, Australia collapsed in 1980, it appeared at first glance to be just another bank failure. But after Australian authorities began taking a closer look, they discovered a tangled web of intrigue with all the elements of a best-selling spy novel. A mysterious death, the body later dug up from its grave, illegal currency transactions, big-time drug operations, and the Central Intelligence Agency.
We were to become the paymasters for the CIA around the world. In other words, we were putting ourselves in the position to disperse funds for the CIA to whoever they were directed.
Former bank executive Neil Evans, given immunity from prosecution, agreed to talk about the Nugan Hand operation on Australian television. From his account and others, the bank had its genesis during the Vietnam War. 4 of the original stockholders were Americans who listed their addresses as Air America, Army Post Office, San Francisco. Air America was the CIA airline in Indochina, hauling men and supplies on clandestine missions. And according to former CIA agents, even drugs out of the so-called Golden Triangle, where the borders of Burma, Laos, and Thailand converge. Nugan Hand sent Neil Evans to the Thai city of Chiang Mai, the commercial center of the drug trade. He claims the CIA made millions and used the money to finance some of its secret projects.
The idea was that money would be deposited with the Nugan Hand Bank by the CIA through various channels, and also that the Nugan Hand Bank would be the repository for funds coming in from various CIA enterprises, namely drugs in Thailand, marijuana in particular, and that the Nugan Hand Bank would then be responsible for rerouting that money to an account in America with a New York bank.
Nugan Hand was not your ordinary bank. There were secret numbered accounts, and hardly any of its top people were bankers. Many were American civilians and former high-ranking military officers with ties to U.S. intelligence. When they found the body of Australian businessman Frank Nugan, the bank's chairman, shot to death a few months before the bank went under, they discovered in his pocket the business card of this man, William Colby, former director of the CIA. Nugan's partner was Michael Hand, an American Green Beret who served 2 tours in Vietnam, one of them for the Central Intelligence Agency. He disappeared a short while after the bank collapsed and is now believed to be dead. Australian newspapers reported a connection between Nugan Hand and the U.S. Navy's super-secret intelligence unit known as Task Force 157. Among its top agents, CIA man Edwin Wilson, now under indictment for selling arms and explosives to Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. And a man named Patry Loomis has also been implicated. He was the apparent CIA Nugan Hand go-between. It was Loomis who helped Wilson recruit a team of Green Berets to train terrorists in Libya.
The Nugan Hand affair has caused an uproar in Australia, where authorities are trying to find out what involvement the bank might have had in the 1975 downfall of the Labour Party government. Meanwhile, investigators on 3 continents are attempting to trace $50 million missing from the accounts of depositors, including many Americans. Here in this country, the CIA denies any involvement with drug operations in Indochina, the Nugan Hand Bank itself, or the deaths of the 2 men who ran it. Gary Shepard, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Tamworth was opened in 1947 and quickly gained a reputation as the most feared prison in the land. Some of its alumni include Nettie Smith, George Freeman and William Munday.
42-year-old Anthony Eustace was about to get into his Mercedes outside the airport Hilton when the gunman opened fire. There were 6 shots from a .45 caliber handgun. 4 hit Eustace in the chest.
Bombshell today from the Police Royal Commission. It revealed an undercover surveillance operation, secretly taping bribe payouts over the past 9 months. The operation was carried out with the help of an officer turned informer. The Commission claims it now has an extensive database of crooked police and is calling on them to come forward or go to jail.
Idaho Falls is a comfortable, sleepy town in Middle America where occasional trains rumble through on their way somewhere else and people mind their own business. Michael Hand has been hiding out here in plain sight for decades. His neighbours don't know his real name or his dark past, but he's let it be known he's a decorated war hero. Hand thought he'd got away with it, undetected all these years. But what's brought about his undoing is the very thing that saved his life in combat in Vietnam 50 years ago. His love of knives.
And our knives have become very, very popular overseas.
Michael John Hand is now Michael John Fuller. He owns a very profitable business producing specialist knives for military and police tactical ops units. A business that would leave a paper trail and eventually prove to be his undoing. Do you think the American intelligence services helped Hand hide for the last 35 years?
Somebody's helped Michael Hand disappear. Somebody helped him resettle in America, start a new life, give him a new name. How does that happen?
The parallel street is Freeman Avenue.
Copy that. We're turning into Freeman now.
You see, people have been looking for him. A lot of people have been looking for him.
Well, we've filmed him.
Yeah?
We've confronted him.
Found Michael Hand.
Yep.
Oh dear.
This is the moment Michael Hand probably thought would never come. Michael John Hand, Los Coulter, 60 Minutes Australia. We've been looking for you for a long time, sir. I think you're pretty good likeness, don't you think? We'd really like to talk to you, Mike. We've been following you for a long time. You've got a really interesting story to tell. And moreover, there are a lot of people in Australia who are owed a lot of money by you.